Overall, I enjoyed a happy marriage that lasted 5 years. I am 32 years old and my wife is 29. We crossed paths on the train. I was heading home, and she was going to visit an old friend. As they say, there was a spark between us from the very beginning. When we arrived at the train station, we exchanged phone numbers. Naturally, I called her that evening and invited her for coffee and cakes the next evening. She agreed, but with a caveat. She insisted that she would not come alone. That's all. As promised, she came with her friend. To my surprise, her companion was a former classmate. Short, slender, incredibly attractive, and full of life. However, I was completely focused on my future wife. Of course, I was polite to both of them, playing the role of a true gentleman, but all my compliments and special attention were meant for her. As for her friend, she was already in a relationship with someone, and even took steps to get married. We began dating, and after 6 months, we decided it was time to make things official. Naturally, we went to meet her parents. My future father-in-law was a retired military man, a modest rank of ensign, yet a truly respectable individual. I was taken aback, as the usual jokes about ensigns didn't apply to him at all. He was well-read, free of vices, didn't swear, and was quite diligent. After serving 25 years, he retired, but that didn't stop him from working. He became a private entrepreneur. My future mother-in-law was a warm and caring woman who managed a printing house. She was a fantastic cook, especially known for her baking. Cookies, cakes, you name it. As the only child, my wife's parents were eager to meet the man she had chosen, and thankfully they seemed to take a liking to me, giving their blessing. Now, as for my own parents, well, it felt like I didn't have any. My mother passed away from a routine appendicitis during surgery. The doctors were slow to diagnose her. After her death, my father spiraled into a dysfunctional lifestyle, but eventually met another woman 2 years later. He settled down again, starting a new family. I left home at 16. My father's new wife had no interest in getting to know me. She was focused entirely on her own daughter, whom she doted on and catered to. My father's response was simply, "Figure it out yourself. You're a man now." We got married, and, in general, relatives, among other things, gave us a car. My father-in-law even opened a branch of his business in our city and appointed me manager. Surprisingly, the work got better quickly. Although I have been working part-time in various jobs lately, my professional position left much to be desired. But that's beside the point. Overall, life was good. We often gathered together with my wife's friend and her husband, had picnics and outings in nature. Her friend's husband was a great guy. We supported each other, became friends with both families, and even attended major events and parties together. However, over the past year, I couldn't help but notice that my wife began to praise her friend too often in my presence. "She's so beautiful," she said, "and what a kind and accommodating soul she has." Then one day, as if it was a random thought, she asked, "Did she get your attention?" It seemed strange to me. After all, at parties, my wife often pushed me to dance with her friend, claiming that her friend was bored and her husband was not paying attention to her. Then one day, my wife's friend called me, saying we needed to meet. I jokingly replied, "I don't date married women," to which she responded that this would be no ordinary meeting. I drove up to her workplace during lunch. She got into my car, and there was tension in the air as we exchanged pleasantries. She silently handed me the flash drive and told me to look at it when I got home, and then quickly slipped out of the car. Back at work, my curiosity was practically consuming me. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. What I found were 3 videos. In each of them were my wife and her husband. It turned out my wife's friend had started to suspect her husband and had asked me to install a camera at home. I was shocked to discover that my wife and her friend's husband had been seeing each other for the past year. I had been completely oblivious, while her friend had immediately noticed the shift in her husband's behavior. We tied the knot, and overall, My in-laws gifted us a car. Among other things, my father-in-law even opened a branch of his business in our city and appointed me as the manager. Surprisingly, work picked up quickly. Though I had been juggling various part-time jobs recently, my professional situation left much to be desired. But that's beside the point. All in all, life was good. We frequently got together with my wife's friend and her husband, enjoying picnics and outings. My friend's husband was a great guy. We supported each other, became friends with both families, and even attended large events and parties together. However, over the past year, I couldn't help but notice that my wife had started to praise her friend a bit too often in my presence. "She's so beautiful," she'd say, "and what a kind and accommodating spirit she has." Then one day, as if it were a casual thought, she asked, "Has she caught your eye?" It struck me as odd. After all, at gatherings, my wife often nudged me to dance with her friend, claiming her friend was bored while her husband didn't pay attention. Then one day, my wife's friend called me, saying we needed to meet. I jokingly replied, "I don't date married women," to which she responded that this would be no ordinary meeting. So, I met her. I pulled up to her workplace during lunch. She got into my car, and while we exchanged pleasantries, there was a palpable tension in the air. She silently handed me a flash drive and instructed me to look at it when I got home, then quickly slipped out of the car. Back at work, my curiosity was practically consuming me. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. What I found were 3 videos. In each of them were my wife and her husband. It turned out my wife's friend had started to suspect her husband and had asked me to install a camera at home. I was shocked to discover that my wife and her friend's husband had been seeing each other for the past year. I had been completely oblivious, while her friend had immediately noticed the shift in her husband's behavior. Barely realizing what was happening, I felt a cold wave of anger and betrayal wash over me. Every moment I trusted my wife now seemed like a deception. The thought of sharing her love with another was unbearable. I closed my eyes so as not to see the shocking content of the video, but images kept popping up in my head. Their laughter, touching, confidential conversations. I never thought that I would find myself in such a situation. I came home in the evening with a heavy heart. My wife, as if nothing had happened, greeted me with a smile and offered me dinner. I forced myself to smile back, realizing that she didn't even know about my discovery. My soul was as empty as the refrigerator. Talking about everyday things didn't bring me any comfort, and I couldn't focus on what she was saying. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time, turning over from side to side. My thoughts were filled with anger and despair. I knew it couldn't go on like this. In the morning, when the rays of the sun broke through the curtains, I decided it was time to act. I didn't want to stay in this position anymore. A conversation with his wife was inevitable. When she returned from work, I gathered my thoughts and called her into the kitchen. "We need to talk," I said, trying to sound calm. She looked at me in disbelief. I turned on the video on my laptop and put it on the table between us. I saw an instantaneous change in her face. First shock, then horror. She started to brush off the accusations, tried to justify herself. But I didn't listen. I already knew all the answers. I asked, feeling a mixture of pain and betrayal, what happened between us? Her tears and excuses could not erase the wound she had inflicted. I felt like everything was falling apart. We both knew that this was the end of our marriage. The decision to divorce came easily, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. We were just 2 people who once loved each other, but now stood on the wreckage of a dream of living together. The divorce was a long and painful process. Discussing the division of property, disputes about who should pick up the car, became an unbearable ordeal. But what was worst of all was the realization that the relationship we had been building for 5 years had turned into a wreck of hopes and dreams. In the end, I signed the divorce papers, and with every breath I took, I realized that now I had to learn how to live again. My life was divided into before and after, and although I knew that I still had many difficulties ahead of me, I was ready to move on. 4. Omini.